All right, so let's go ahead and look at that trade setup that I was able to take that allowed me to pass the challenge, right? But before we do, I want to go ahead and share some screenshots with you. And these screenshots are before price actually started moving in my direction. And the reason I want to do that is because, as I mentioned before, I always try to be as transparent as I possibly can. So I want to show you the trade setup in itself before it actually happened, and then we'll go through the trade setup. This screenshot right here actually displays on the smaller time frame, right? The 5 minute time frame is where I actually got my entry from. And it shows as price is approaching the entry zone. At this point, price has come up, it's tapped me in, and I'm inside of the trade. So we're actually going to dive into this area and really go over all of the confirmations for the trade and why I actually ended up taking that trade in itself. I also want to show you guys price around the entry on the smaller time frame, on the 1 minute time frame. So here you can see that my entry was triggered around this area here. We'll dive deeper of the confirmations later on in the video, but I want to share light into this right here because this was extremely important in terms of me managing the trade and allowing it to really just unfold and let the trade play out. A lot of traders in this area would have most likely closed their trade or taken partials, but me myself, I was able to understand what was really happening in this area here, and that was the key difference in really allowing me to either let this trade play out and I pass the challenge, or having to take the partials, the profits, and then look for another entry and another trade. Really quick, what I want to display here is this right here. After price came into my entry zone and started creating these equal lows, this was a great sign for my psychology, right? Because at this point in time, price is distributing itself. It's giving me reasons as to why it would want to continue lower to take out these lows and these lows, right? So that is really key, especially in the minutes following after my entry. So as price continues to print, what I like to do in my trading and as I'm managing my trade is start to identify the areas that it should respect if it's going to continue in my favor, right? If I'm able to do that as price prints, I'm going to be able to follow price effectively. And essentially, I know more so where the market is heading, right? But I need to be able to understand structure on the smaller time frame. Another thing that I want to point out here is this trend line. This trend line was key. So this trend line here was a really big key because what it did was it allowed me to understand that this move right here might be a retail trap, right? A retail trap being as price comes back to test this supposed trend line, what a lot of retail traders are most likely thinking is an unpost to the upside. What price actually ends up doing is breaking below, messing with the psychology and manipulating a lot of traders, and then fully distributing itself to then push down lower, right? So this trend line right here was a really big key because it allowed me to understand that, hey, we might have a retail trap setup within this area. So let's go ahead and look at the trade setup itself. Now, what I want to highlight is this candlestick formation here. Now, this is something sort of like an evening star, but it's more so for me, a 3 candlestick variation pattern would allow me to understand that, hey, we may be potentially shifting into a bearish market. This was the first sign that I saw. After this, I want to go into the smaller time frame and identify more clues, right? Get a little more precise. See what's happening on the smaller time frame so that I can understand and see if I want to enter or not. As I drop down to the 15-minute, I can start to identify a clearer point of interest that I might be interested, right? Right now, at this moment, it's just a little too soon for me to take action. So this, I'm starting to note as the possible area for price to retrace back into, and then from there, take my entry, right? I want to see confirmation on a smaller time frame first so that I can go ahead and pull the trigger. As this is playing out, I'm waiting for price to reach this level here. Once price reaches in that level, I just need to look for price action to be able to pull the trigger. So as price is coming back in, I'm patiently waiting to get tapped in for my entry. And there it is. So as I drop down to the 5 minute time frame, I'm able to identify an even clearer supply zone, right? This is the area on the smaller time frame that if it respects, it's going to generate some really good risk to reward. So let me just put the trade setup tool that I had, with my stop loss being 6 pips, just above the recent highs here, because I want to see price respect this. If price does not respect this area here, then my trade setup is invalid at that point, right? Because at that point, price can just continue flying up to the upside and there's really no trade setup. So my trade setup really came from this point of interest here within this supply zone. So as price came up, it tapped me in. And at that point, it's really just allowing myself to be able to manage the trade as it prints and allow myself to make the most of the trade. So this trade setup in itself actually ended up being a 10-to-1, right? But myself, I didn't need a 10-to-1. I only needed 8%. So essentially, I was able to take my profits pretty early on at an 8-to-1. And we can just take a look at how price played out. And you'll see that it was a pretty effortless, straight into profit kind of trade. So at this point, this was the last time price came back to test my entry point. And after that, it was just a straight melt. Price kept on melting for the next few hours. And you'll see that price hit the take profit pretty easily at that moment right there. I was out of the markets. I had passed the challenge. All I needed to do was just close my laptop and just wait for the remaining days of the challenge. So as you can see from this trade setup, everything was spot on, from the entry to the stop loss to the risk management and even managing the trade itself. And this is just a really good example that you only need one trade setup to really pass one of these challenges, right? You don't need to spend the entire time, although your risk management has to be precise, right? It has to be to par. You can't be messing around with the risk management. You have to have a really good understanding of how much you're leveraging per trade. That is the only way that these higher leverage positions will go ahead and work in your favor. If not, you're just going to be blowing accounts after blowing accounts. So if you'd like to see more trade setup videos, feel free to let me know in the comments. Like, subscribe, share with your family, friends, any trader that may need this. There's a lot of nuggets in the video. See you next time.